Welcome to the Pediatric Playbook, where we guide growth in children and balance in ourselves. I'm Amanda, a pediatric occupational therapist, here to share stories, strategies, and insights to support parents, therapists, teachers, and caregivers as we navigate the ever-evolving world of child development together. From tackling potty training and sensory needs to celebrating milestones, this podcast is your go-to resource for practical advice, inspiring stories, and honest conversations. Each week, we'll explore topics that matter to you, whether you're a parent looking for answers or a pediatric OT, SLP, PT, or educator searching for fresh perspectives. I'll also sit down with other therapists and professionals to dive into their unique journeys and the lessons they've learned along the way. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive into this journey together. Whether you're here for personal growth, professional insights, or a little bit of both, I am so glad you're here. Welcome to the Pediatric Playbook. I'm so excited for today's episode because I'm joined by not only a fantastic pediatric OT, but also one of my best friends and college roommates, Lindsay. We have shared so many memories and late night study sessions and plenty of laughs. Linz, thanks so much for joining me today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. This is so exciting.
I know. I'm so excited for us to dive into all the things now that we're like real life adult women.
We really are. We made it.
We did. Can you introduce yourself a little bit and share just a bit about your background in pediatric OT?
Sure. So my name's Lindsay. And for those of you that don't know, Amanda and I were actually college roommates. Random roommates. We randomly met on Facebook and became best friends before we even met, which is crazy.
So crazy.
And freshman year, I came in undecided as my major, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I feel like you weren't totally sure either, but you had been in OT, and you were like, yeah, I'm thinking about doing this job, occupational therapy, and I had never even heard of an OT. And then I started looking into it and I was like, wait, that sounds really cool. Maybe I'll do the same thing, because everything we did was the same.
Still the same at this point in our lives.
Still, nothing's changed. And so that's how I actually got into OT, which is crazy. And then went to grad school after we finished college for 3 years. I got my doctorate in OT. I graduated in 2020. And then my first job was actually in adults. So I worked in inpatient rehab, acute care with adults for 2 years. And I learned a lot, but I think I realized that was not my preferred setting. So then I left my job mainly because I was moving states. And then when I was looking into new jobs, I was like, well, maybe I should try pediatrics. I've always liked kids. Maybe I'll give it a try. And then I stumbled upon this job for inpatient acute mental health, which is something I had never considered either. So I was making a really big jump from not only from adults, but also just a completely different type of setting. But it sounded really cool and like a new experience. So I took the job, and now I've been doing that for a little over 2 years now.
Wow. I know when you first told me that that was the job you're taking, I was so excited for you, a little bit jealous, because I was like, this is such a cool place to be in. And I feel like jobs like that don't just come available. It's so hard to find niche jobs. It's always, especially in peds, like you're either in the school or you're in the clinic, or you can do the early intervention, which I think I was doing that when you got that job. Had already transitioned to that, which I liked. But when you said you got that, I was like, I cannot wait to just hear everything about what this job is, because we never learned about it in school.
Yeah, it's definitely really rare, which is, I think it's something that's going to change over time, just because mental health is becoming so much more normalized and talked about and prioritized. So I'm hoping that this will become more of the norm. But yeah, so the hospital I work at actually had just opened when I applied. So I feel like it is a really new concept. And it's pretty rare that I got this opportunity. So feel very lucky. And I have been enjoying it for the most part.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so fun and fascinating to hear you talk about things just now. We don't live so close to each other. Even after college, we then moved to the same city. We just have always been on that same life path, but now we've been living apart for like, it's been 2 years already.
Gosh,
I
yeah.
think so, which is so crazy. And so we don't get to really catch up on this kind of stuff all the time. So I'm excited to kind of just talk about it. And it was so cool that, I got to be the one to watch you develop this passion for, OT and this healthcare field, and that I kind of played a little role in that, which is,
You
really
did for
exciting.
sure.
But, with that, like, what does a typical day look like for you in that specific setting? I'm sure it's literally never boring.
That's true. It's never boring. So, the hospital is for any kids that are deemed to be a risk to themselves or to others. So, they have to be immediate harm risk. So, they typically stay in the hospital for about 7 to 10 days, is the average length of stay, but it really depends for every kid. Um, so, it is primarily group therapy based, which is also really cool and niche for
Yeah.
OTs. So typically the kids are in groups pretty much from like the time they wake up until the time they go to bed. So for OT, we typically do like 2 or 3 groups per day per OT. So
Okay.
basically, each unit will get OT once a day in a group. And other than that, I really just have any evaluations that come in and then any one to one session. So, one to one would be any kid that needs any additional OT specific needs, um, or for any kids that aren't quite ready to be put with other kids. Maybe they're too aggressive, or they have too much social anxiety and they aren't programming with the other kids. We can see them one to one. So,
Wow.
besides my like 2 or 3 scheduled groups, which are typically about 45 minutes to an hour, my day is really flexible, which I love. I really kind of like that, like acute scheduling for the day, that basically I get to come in and I know how many evals I'm going to see, but I can kind of schedule my day however I want from there, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's so unique. Like that does not exist in pediatrics. It's usually like back to back to back all day long.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of nice. I can like come in early if I want and then leave early or come in later. So the flexibility of the scheduling is really, really nice.
So it's not a like salaried 40-hour week style job.
No, it is hourly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you're still kind of required. It's not like 1099. You still are required to put in PTO and expected to be there every day.
Yeah, it's kind of unique in that way too. Because my last job, you were either hourly or salary. Salary was like a 40-hour position. Hourly was you never knew what you were going to get. So this position is kind of unique in the sense that I am full time, like I work at least 32 hours a week, but I can work anywhere from 32 to 40. And I get benefits, PTO, all of those things, which is amazing as well because my last job did not have those either. So I highly recommend those benefits. And like I get raises every year, which is amazing. So
That is amazing. And when it comes to like the paperwork side of things with that, are you in the groups having to document on each kid that's in the group with you? Do you document the group as a whole? How does that work?
that's a good question. So I document on each kid after each group, but it's not as detailed as you would typically do, like an outpatient kid, or how I used to do with my adults. You pretty much just do like a general blurb for the objective that every single kid you copy and paste, just like what the group's purpose was. And then in their assessment, just write anything you notice with their behavior, their attention, their participation, and how they're progressing towards their goals. And you do go through their goals after every group, and just check like if they've progressed, met any, because in the acute setting, like their long-term goals are 3 weeks. So
Wow.
like, they're meeting usually a goal like every day or two, from their short-term goals. So
That's crazy. I feel
So
like I
different.
can go 6 months and we're still like not fully there with some of our short-term goals. And maybe I need to get better at goal writing for myself and making things a little bit more tangible. But that's so crazy that acute care is so fast-paced. But
Yeah.
great too. I'm sure you see a lot of progress.
Yeah, that is the cool thing. And like the point of this setting really is just stabilization. So, like, you're making sure they are safe to go wherever their next step may be. And so, another thing we offer at our hospital actually is called partial hospitalization, where so instead of inpatient where they're staying there 24/7, partial hospitalization, it's kind of like a school day. So they come there Monday through Friday from like 8 to 3 or whatever. And it's the same kind of schedule and the fact of they're getting different therapeutic groups every day. And OT is involved in this program as well. But then they get to go home at night and on the weekend. So that oftentimes can be like a step down service after they do the acute program. They might go to partial as like a step down to help with the transition.
Wow. So, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing in working with the kids in this like specific acute setting? And how are you going about navigating all that? Because I feel like this is a very unique and somewhat challenging population to work with.
Yeah, it definitely can be. I mean, like I said, these kids are here because they're an imminent risk to themselves or to others. So most of them will have difficulty regulating emotions. They might be set off by very small things or things that feel small to us, but might be big triggers for them for whatever reason. In my job, I've been hit, I've been bitten, I've had my hair pulled, all those things. But we do take a course and we do a refresher course every year called Safety Care that prepares us for all of these potential behavioral events. So if they do happen, which our first priority is de-escalation, like trying to prevent those things from happening. But if they do happen, we know how to handle them. But it's never enjoyable when those events happen. So that I think would be a big challenge. It's also obviously very common to have arguments between the patients. They're living in a locked unit together, spending so much time in a small space, and they're all pretty emotionally vulnerable and emotionally charged at this time. So, that's another thing we really have to watch out for is any kids that seem to be butting heads, we need to separate them. If a kid starts arguing during groups, like how to figure out how to de-escalate that situation so it doesn't turn into a fight. And I will say those things have been pretty rare, but when it does happen, it is a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine how tough that can be sometimes when your own nervous system is feeling in fight or flight mode when you have a child coming at you or even using some triggering words. I mean, we all have our own nervous systems that are triggered by certain things. And so it's got to be really hard sometimes to bring yourself down and be able to step away. But I know you have such good passion and patience and compassion for this kind of work and kids, so it's a little bit easier when your heart is actually in what you do and you enjoy what you do to not get so triggered. So I'm not surprised that you handle it so well. When I hear you talk about your coworkers, it seems like you guys just have such a good group that works there, so that's just amazing. But wow, how different of a daily life than most pediatric OTs have.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just thinking of another thing when you mentioned pediatric outpatient is that something I had never thought about is the like lack of materials that we're able to use in an acute setting. Whereas like if you go to outpatient OT, you're constantly doing crafts and using scissors and
Yeah.
colored pencils, like all the things. And in this setting, there's so many regulations of things that we can't use. So, like, no scissors, nothing with glass, nothing with string, no pencils, pens, colored pencils. So, and like when you go to a group, all of your materials have to be accounted for. So, no using like small objects that might be able to be taken. When you bring your markers, you have to count them when you come in and count them when you leave to make sure no one's taking them and trying to self harm or anything. So, it's just
Wow.
those aspects of the job that, like, typically in settings I had been in before, I had never thought about. So now it's like second nature to me, but at the beginning, it was definitely hard to get used to that.
Yeah, I've literally never thought about that when we talk about your day-to-day life and, this cases, it's just crazy that things that to me, I'm packing my bag full of all of the things, sometimes a kid will pull out, I accidentally left a paint thing in there and they're like, oh, can we use this? I'm like, oh no, sorry, it's broken right now. The parents like, we're not getting into that, but I don't even think twice about things that I'm throwing in my bag half the time. So that is got to be so challenging to try to come up with activities and techniques. And thinking about that, like, can you help describe some of the OT techniques that you do use to help kids regulate their emotions and behaviors? And are there any like specific go-to strategies that really make a big impact and difference that you've specifically seen or used?
Yeah, so all of our groups are focused on, we have like 6 topics that we focus on. So we'll do stress management and coping strategies, anger management, self esteem building, assertive communication skills, sensory regulation, and then sleep hygiene. So for group therapy, we try to make all of our groups fall into one of those categories. And then for one-to-one, like kids that have extra sensory needs, we can offer noise canceling headphones, different fidget tools. We can do aromatherapy. We can give little wobble cushions if they have trouble sitting still. We've also worked on creating sensory diets for the kids that really have trouble sitting still. Because I mean, it is a really long day with lots of groups. And so some of these kids just need to have those like scheduled movement breaks, proprioceptive input, use of the quiet room, anything like that. And so we can develop a sensory schedule for anyone who might benefit from it.
Are you ever doing like exercise or yoga or anything in your groups?
I do sometimes, yeah. So the gym can be everyone's fighting for gym time, basically. So, but when I can get access of the gym, yes, I have done yoga, which the kids really enjoy. We also have like an outside play area that if anytime it's nice out and I'm able to get that space, I do try to use that as well. Because, they are inside most of the day and it's nice to get some movement in and sunshine when they can.
Yeah. What is the age range that you're typically seeing? And what is like the youngest or oldest that you can work with?
So we can take from 6 to 17. I would say average age is, I mean, probably like 14. We do have some littles, but usually the youngest we're getting is like 9, 10. And then it's really common just any of the teenage years. So an average of like 13, 14.
Wow, that is so young to be going through this, these kind of life experiences for the kids. And I know right now, trauma-informed care is such an important topic and aspect of our work as occupational therapists and for all healthcare professionals and parents and teachers. So, like, how do you approach that in your practice, especially with kids who've had some just really difficult life experiences leading up to having to come to this acute care setting?
Yeah, I think trauma informed care is really important. And it's something that I've definitely done continuing education on because it's obviously so prevalent in our hospital. But I think the first thing I always try to do is read every kid's chart before I see them. Oftentimes, I mean, you'll get a lot about their history. And then they'll usually ask the kids, like, what are specific triggers for you? So that just being aware of those things before you even meet the kid. I think it's also important just to make sure every kid feels safe with you. Most of these kids, when they're coming in, they're like, I don't trust you. I don't know you. I'm not going to tell you anything, which is totally fair. So I think taking time to build rapport with them is really important. Letting them know that like I'm here for their goals. I'm not here to make goals for them, which I think is just an OT thing in general, like we're there for the patient. We want to work on things that they want to work on. We don't want to force them to work on anything that they don't want to, or I don't force them to share in groups if they don't want to. So just making them feel comfortable with you and just knowing like, this is my role. This is what I'm here for. I'm here to help you. And I feel like that goes a long way with them.
Yeah. Do you feel like kids, when you're asking them about their triggers, I think about some of the kids I work with. I know I work with, sometimes a younger population, but are they typically pretty self-aware on their own triggers, or is that a process that they go through sometimes in your setting as well?
That's a good question. So I remember when I first started, I was just blown away by how like self-aware some of these kids are. I'm like, they're teenagers and I'm asking them all these questions and they're able to answer like, what are your stressors? What are the ways that you cope? But oftentimes, if these kids are coming to an acute setting, they've probably been in some outpatient therapy beforehand. So I do think a lot of the times I'm very surprised and impressed by like how self-aware they are. Obviously, there are some kids that some of their goals might be to be able to identify a trigger or a stressor or any type of emotional identification. So it does totally vary. But yeah, typically I would say they are more aware than you would expect.
Yeah, that's crazy, but also amazing, and something that I think us as professionals and teachers and parents often forget, even starting at such a young age, that they are, human beings, and they are more aware than sometimes we give, them credit, and they have more independence and autonomy than, we can even think of. It's hard to remember ourselves at that age too, but when you really think back on it, I'm like, wow, I really did know all those things and I wanted that independence. And so it's amazing to hear that they do have that, ability to communicate to you like, hey, these are the things that I like or don't like. And being able to self-advocate, I think, is so important, especially in that population. And it must just require such a thoughtful and compassionate approach from all team members in that type of setting and hospital. Is there, a specific story, without any identifying details, about like one specific child or case that you can think of that made like really significant progress? I'm sure like anyone listening would love to hear a real life example. And if you can't, go into that, that's totally okay too.
Yeah, it's hard because I do think I've seen progress in so many kids. But the one that stands out to me is this kid who came in. He was really not doing well. He was having a very hard time with controlling his aggression. He was at the point that he had to be on a unit completely by himself because he couldn't even be around other kids. And so OT was working with him one on one. And I feel like we established a really good rapport with him. We were working on just like I was just saying, like emotional identification. Like this was a kid who couldn't even identify what his triggers were. He was just triggered so quickly. So trying to figure out like, well, what are those things? And then from there working on like, okay, well, how can we cope with those situations? We definitely also talked about social skills, and we were able to kind of like slowly transition him into groups. We would start by like having him paired up with one other kid, and because we did have a good rapport with him as OT, we would like use that as our session. Like, okay, I'm gonna sit with him while he's interacting with this other kid and try to help facilitate that social interaction. And eventually he was able to be integrated back into the group setting. And this kid became like the president of the hospital. Like by the end, he was like running the groups. Like he was Mr. Popular. He was so good with the other kids. Just the progress was incredible. And he was a kid that we felt like once he did leave, because he was there for a considerable amount of time, we felt like, wow, his transition was just outstanding. So seeing things like that, where they start from like their worst times to seeing them thrive, is just so amazing. And just knowing OT did have a part in being able to help with that transition was really cool to see.
Yeah, and just knowing, maybe it doesn't feel like I feel it this way all the time that, you're go through your day to day and you feel exhausted and you get home and it's hard to ever feel like you're making that true impact because it's hard to see it, especially with kids right now. But I'm sure that child is going to look back, years down the road and be so thankful for you guys. And it's just such a awesome thing that you guys are doing. And I'm sure his caregivers were so appreciative as well for all of the help that you guys were able to provide.
Thank you. Yeah, I try to remind myself those things on tough days, like, am I doing anything? Am I making progress? But when you sit back and think about it, and like you said, thinking about certain kids that we've seen, like we're doing the best we can. And I do
Mhm.
think that we are making small differences.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And for any parents or caregivers who have a child facing those mental health challenges, what practical advice can you give to them? If I were in that situation, what would you want me specifically to know?
Yeah, I think first, definitely just giving them like a safe and non judgmental space. I think a lot of kids are scared to open up to their parents about big emotions they might be feeling or suicidal thoughts. Like, that's a really scary thing to talk about. And sometimes it takes an attempt for the parents to even know what's happening. So just making sure like you are having hard conversations with your kids, making sure that they're feeling safe and being able to talk to you. Validate their feelings. I feel like that's a huge one. If they say they're feeling something, letting them know that it's okay to feel those things, and just supporting them through it. I also think just getting them the services they need is incredibly important. And I do know, like, I know for outpatient therapy for kids, the wait lists are so incredibly long. So I do understand like the limitations on those things, but just doing the best you can to get them any services that they need, advocating for them, and just knowing that mental health is nothing to be ashamed of. Like, it should be talked about, and it should be prioritized. I think modeling is also huge. How is a kid supposed to emotionally regulate if we can't show them what that looks like? That is their primary way of learning how to cope, is modeling how their parents cope. So, we all have our moments, but making sure that like you are trying to model to your kid what it looks like to manage difficult feelings in an appropriate way. And then
Yeah.
going off of that, like making sure you're taking care of yourself, because having a child with mental health needs can obviously be really taxing. But you can't fill up your kid's cup if your cup is empty. So just making sure like you're trying to take care of yourself as well as your kids, so that that burnout doesn't start affecting your relationship with your child.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite quotes of all time is you can't pour from an empty cup. And I think it's becoming more talked about and that self-care and not just self-care and going and buying yourself new makeup or whatever, but whatever self-care looks like for you, and making sure that you're going out and you're taking one-on-one time to fuel your own nervous system, most importantly, and doing deep breathing and meditation is hard. Those things are hard because we have to practice them, right? And so I know even for myself, I have been trying to work on those things, thinking about being a parent in the next, coming years as we're approaching our 30s. And, I laugh because a few months ago, I was just having, a few hard weeks at work. I was having some hard cases. I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't eating as healthy. I was, having one too many glasses of wine each week. And I just got so triggered. I shrunk a pair of pants in the dryer and I had like an actual meltdown about it. Like I threw the pants across the room. I like actually cried. Like that's ridiculous. It was a $35 pair of pants. But, my boyfriend came in afterwards and he was like, what just happened? And I was like, I literally don't know. But, I'm picturing if I were to have had a child, watching me in that scenario, like I don't want them to learn that from me of like, this is how we respond when something happens and sets us off. So I think I've gotten really in tune with myself too. And, but also given, myself grace, and it's helped me as an OT that coaches families and knowing to give families grace too, and that we're all human. And sometimes our cups are empty and we can't help it. But knowing like when you have one of those days, like, okay, hey, to your other significant other or someone else that can be a caregiver for your child that night, or just letting your kid know, hey, maybe we're doing more screen time tonight than we normally do because mom needs a half hour to go sit in a dark room with nobody bothering her, just to bring yourself back down to earth out of those moments. So I love that you brought all of that up. Are there any like specific resources that you recommend for parents or even professionals who want to learn more about supporting, their children's mental health? Books, websites, anything you found particularly helpful?
Yeah, I think a good place to start would be NAMI, which stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They offer so many different resources and programs and just a lot of education. They actually offer a free 6-session education program where you can either do it online or they travel around the country in person. And the sessions are focused on like explaining what different treatment options might be for your child, how you can advocate for your child, how to respond to different crisis situations, and just offering support to caregivers, and just validating the fact that mental health conditions can have impacts on the entire family, and this is what you can do. So I think that's a really good place to start. And then other than that, just try to learn more about what specifically your child is experiencing. So, if they're diagnosed with depression, just researching how that might present, how that might be affecting your kid, and how you can support them. Because the more that you understand their diagnosis, the more patient and understanding you'll be, and the more you'll be able to offer them the support and the guidance that they need.
Yeah, I think that's important and great advice for not only parents and caregivers, but for therapists and teachers and anyone that's spending, a good amount of time with these children and is a part of their development.
Yeah.
And I'll link the NAMI website in the session notes at the end so that you guys can go and click on that and check that out. But kind of piggybacking back to my story a little bit about myself, working in such an intense and emotional environment, how are you taking care of yourself and your own well-being on those really big weeks?
Yeah, it can be tough sometimes, but I do try my best to not take work home with me. Obviously, like there's some stories that will really stick with me, and I'll still be thinking about them when I get home. But luckily, with my job, don't have to do any documentation or chart review or anything off the clock. So I really try to leave work at work. And then when I come home, I try to do some form of exercise, whether it's taking a walk outside or going to the gym or yoga, anything like that that can help move my body and like physically relieve that stress. Spending any time with my friends, family, my fiance, just leaning on those supports. Me and you, obviously, we have our weekly hour, 2 hour phone calls where we can just vent about whatever we please. And I always feel so much better after those phone calls.
Me too. I actually was talking to my own personal therapist about it this week. She was asking me like things that fill my cup, things that drain my cup, and things that like I wish I could do. But for some reason there's a barrier, and our phone calls were in the cup, but getting to see my friends in person was outside because all my friends live all over the place. But I think like doing exercises like that are kind of helpful just to help yourself realize like maybe there's something you think is filling your cup, and then you sit down and you really jot it down and you think about it and you're like, wait, this is actually draining my cup, this is not helping me at all. And just realizing those things and writing down specific things that are draining your cup is important to see and visually recognize, like, okay, I need to cut those things out of my weekly routine. And it's so great that you do not have to do any of the chart reviewing or paperwork at home, because I can only imagine with the types of cases that you're seeing and some of that, background history and stuff, and having to kind of read through that either first thing in the morning or before you're going to bed at night could be really taxing on your own nervous system. So I'm glad you don't have to be doing that.
Yeah, that's another perk about the job for sure. Also, I love that cup exercise, and I'm sitting here thinking about how can I make that into a group with my kids, and I love it.
Yeah, I
I'm
know. I feel like I've been in and out of therapy myself for like, I don't even know, maybe like 6 years. It was during COVID actually, is when the first time I did like a virtual therapy thing. I think the whole world was just stressed out, and it was, our first years being in our careers. And so I really started seeing one and I've loved it, but I feel like I've chosen all different therapists and I haven't stuck with one specific one yet. But the one I've recently been seeing, she has some new ideas, and that one I had never heard before either. And I was like, oh, this is, I've heard the cup exercise, but that one specifically was amazing. So hopefully you can, tweak that and use it in some of your groups, and anyone listening could strategize and use that in their sessions as well. Do you have any final thoughts on just really the importance of supporting children's mental health, and where you see the future of pediatric OT and psychiatric care? Because I feel like there's a place for us here.
Yeah. Like I said, I feel so lucky that my program did include OT, but I know not all of the acute programs do. But it's so interesting because OT started in mental health in the first place back 100 years ago or whenever we
Yeah.
started. So I do think like we need to be pushing for our profession to stay involved in psychiatric care, because we can offer so many different types of interventions, and just having that like activity analysis skill can just help in a different way that other professions might not focus on. So I do feel like I was saying, mental health in general is just becoming like a more normalized topic and a priority. And so I just hope that as time continues, more hospitals like mine open up, more resources become available. I do have this long-term dream of mine to open an outpatient OT clinic that is focused on kids that have mental health needs in addition to other developmental needs. Just because a lot of times we will refer some of our kids to outpatient OT that do have sensory needs, but sometimes I send a kid there and I'm like, this is not like a typical kid that you would get in an outpatient setting. And not that I don't feel the OTs would be equipped to handle it, but I just think having a place that the therapists are very skilled in trauma informed care, and different mental health diagnoses would be really, really beneficial. So it's a long-term goal of mine. But we'll see what
That would be seriously so amazing. I think so many people would benefit from it and utilize it, and it doesn't exist really out there. So I really hope your little business brain gets working. I know how hard it is to switch from our healthcare provider brain to being, some kind of business owner and money making, provider. We're so used to just being hired by somebody and going out and providing care for patients and clients. But that would be so amazing if you made that dream come to life. So I'm here to support you along the way if you need me.
Thanks. I know you'll be here.
Well, amazing. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this great information with us today, and just joining me and taking the time to chat. I love that, our listeners got to get a little view into and glimpse into our friendship too, as we bantered back and forth. But it's been just incredible to hear about your work and also to share some laughs along the way. I am so proud of you and grateful to have had you on the Pediatric Playbook. Thank
Yeah.
you to all of our listeners for tuning in today. See you next time. I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation and found it helpful as you navigate along this journey, whether that's supporting kids, growing as a therapist, or both. If you're looking for more resources, tips, or support, be sure to check out my website linked in the show notes, and connect with me on social media at Your Pediatric OT on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, or wherever else you can find me. You'll find everything from free guides to in-depth courses designed to help you make an even bigger impact. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Pediatric Playbook. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend or colleague who'd love it too. I can't wait to see you next time, same place, same time, right here on the Pediatric Playbook.